With less than 3 weeks to go until the United States presidential elections on November 3rd, the race is really heating up. To discuss the situation, we now welcome Abby Martin, journalist for Empire Files, speaking to us from Los Angeles. Abby, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Abby, President Donald Trump has repeatedly referred to the possibility of electoral fraud, casting doubt over the mailing voting system without providing evidence. Do you think there's a possibility that should he be declared the loser, Trump would move to legally challenge the results, as we saw with George Bush in the year 2000?
It's a great point, something that we definitely should be aware of. And first, let's go over what's happening with the mail system exactly here in the United States. Trump, after bemoaning the failures of the post office for 4 years, finally replaced the Postmaster General of the post office with Trump crony, longtime Trump donor, Louis DeJoy. He's given millions of dollars to Trump's election campaign, and also he has financial stake in the competitors, the corporate competitors of the post office. The post office was already facing a manufactured crisis from the GOP for quite some time, I think ever since the Bush administration, and also facing hardships through the pandemic. So it was already struggling financially. And Trump is essentially, what he's done is sabotage the mail system. Not only sowed distrust in the mail-in ballot process, but also financially trying to bankrupt it. Now, during the debate with Joe Biden, he repeated endless streams of lies about the fact that there was widespread voter fraud. We know that this is statistically completely false, totally insignificant when compared to the widespread voter suppression, things like cross-check, which essentially just kicks off millions of people from the ballot polls. And he repeated this talking point that there was voter fraud. He said millions of ballots are found in rivers and garbage cans, and these are all ballots essentially trying to vote for me. Completely false statements through and through. But what it has done is made Trump voters more likely, according to a Washington Street Journal poll, more likely to go out and vote in person for the election. The numbers are basically flipped in terms of Biden voters, which are actually more likely, much more likely to vote through mail-in voting. And so what that's done is now made the notion that we could not know the results of the election. And this is all, of course, hypothetical, but it is probable that we might not know the election results on the day of the election. Of course, our democracy, so-called democracy, is already pretty fragile. We have the fraudulent Electoral College again, things like gerrymandering, voter suppression, cross-check. So it's already very hard for people to have a fair, vote in this country. But now what we're looking like is potentially another right-wing coup on election day, where Trump could very well allegedly win the Electoral College like he did last time, of course, lose the popular vote, but, in a false democracy, that doesn't really matter. And then Joe Biden could win via mail-in ballots much later on. We could see weeks of counting these mail-in ballots because Republicans have also splintered the ability to count votes in advance of the election. So now all of these states, a lot of swing states, are going to be counting votes way late, the day of the election and beyond. And so we could see potential anarchy, chaos in the streets, that coupled with the fact that Trump is actually calling on his supporters, which we know to be right-wing militias, people armed to the teeth, to actually patrol polling centers and intimidate voters on election day. So a lot could happen. We already know that he's stacking the Supreme Court. We have the third Trump nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, facing nomination process right now. Democrats are just rolling over and letting this happen. They are not putting up a fight whatsoever. The best that they can do is basically say, we are going to politely ask her to recuse herself if indeed it does come down to Trump having the Supreme Court that he has himself stacked over the last 4 years to decide the outcome of the election. Well, we already know what happened in 2000. Democrats just let this happen back then. It looks like they're going to let it happen again. So we have Republicans once again rigging the election process, undermining democracy in every which way, and Democrats lining up to let it happen.
And Abby, moving on to foreign policy, Trump has played to the far-right anti-Cuban and anti-Venezuelan minority in Florida throughout his term. Meanwhile, his Democratic rival, Joe Biden, has said he would move to restore Barack Obama's policy regarding Cuba. What, if any, differences can be discerned between the foreign policy of the two candidates, especially as regards Latin America and the Caribbean?
It's a really important point, and unfortunately, not too many Americans seem to be focused on foreign policy. Let's just go over really quickly what Trump's foreign policy has been specifically toward Latin America since he got into office. He oversaw the right-wing coup in Bolivia. This has been factually proven. The coup perpetrators have been linked directly back to the United States. He overturned Barack Obama's normalization with Cuba. This was a really, really significant event. He immediately overturned that once he got into office. He increased sanctions across Latin America to devastating levels. Of course, Barack Obama also had sanctions in place against countries like Venezuela, but the sanctions in place that Trump has implemented have actually cost the lives of tens of thousands of Venezuelans, not to mention the sanctions on Nicaragua, Cuba, as John Bolton, the neocon outlier that's completely insane, that Trump actually appointed to run policy against what he called the troika of tyranny to replace Bush administration's axis of evil against Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. We saw widespread offenses against these countries in the first couple of years of Trump's presidency. And of course, who can forget Elliot Abrams, the cartoonish Smurf-like villain who actually was indicted in the Iran-Contra scandal by hiding weapons and aid shipments to the Contras. Here he is trying to oversee Trump's illegal coup against Venezuela. Once again, that fraudulent aid delivery run by Elliot Abrams himself. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. It is cartoonishly evil. And of course, the attempted assassination against Nicolas Maduro. I mean, that's the biggest one of all, right? This repeated coup attempt from the Trump administration to kill and take over a democratically elected leader, very, very popular democratically elected leader, and install a U.S. coup puppet, Juan Guaido. And the only reason that he's not president today is because the PSUV, of course, is widely popular and Juan Guaido is widely loathed in the country. So that's in a nutshell. And of course, we can't forget the fact that a bounty is still on Maduro's head to this day from the likes of Mike Pompeo. So now to Joe Biden. He is also pandering directly to the Gusano right wing in Florida. He has actually paraphernalia on his campaign being anti-communist. He said he's proudly proclaiming himself to be anti-communist. He continues to throw Bernie's base under the bus. And what's fascinating to me is the constant pandering to the right wing, and the right wing specifically in Florida when it comes to Cuban exiles and Venezuelan exiles. These people are voting for Trump. They are not going to vote for Joe Biden in the first place. So it is bizarre and baffling that Joe Biden continues to pander to them. And I think it's really just a testament to how much he hates the left and how much he continues to signal to conservatives and moderates. He has also proudly proclaimed his support for Trump's coup, I think recently as 2 weeks ago, saying he supports Juan Guaido. It's just mind-boggling, the fact that the Democrats continue to support Trump's worst foreign policy blunders and policies. He also recently tweeted that he supports Cuban democracy and freeing Cuban political prisoners. So while there is a stark difference in terms of the Cuban policy, which I think is actually very beneficial to Cuba and in terms of re-normalizing relations with Cuba, which would be a very good thing, I think it's important to remember that Trump and Biden are very, very similar when it comes to foreign policy. Having the détente with Cuba doesn't mean he doesn't want to overthrow the communist government there. And so what you see in terms of differences of Trump and Biden's foreign policy is much less than their similarities. And really, it's all about just different timelines, tactics, and styles in terms of overthrowing the Cuban government and overthrowing the Venezuelan government. And what's the most shameful about this is the Democrats agree with it all. It's a real big shame for anti-imperialists here in this country because there's no discussion about reversing these policies, about lifting the sanctions, and that's why we need to build an anti-imperialist struggle in the streets and not expect change in the electoral arena.
Abby, thank you so much for joining us and for your insight, and we really look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks.